Today I want to talk about what happens when you have tamarisk that's defoliated by beetles, but no other disturbance to the tamarisk. So what's going on underneath those canopies? It's been a long time since I've really done a lot of talking about plants. I'm basically an insect ecologist, so you have to bear with me. I'll give you a few more pictures of beetles. But you can see that sometimes the beetle can aggregate in pretty high numbers. And those of you that saw Wright's talk earlier, there are clear impacts of the beetle. It's doing a good job. This is the same site, 2005 above and 2008 below. A lot of the above ground structure is really dead. The bark is gone. And so it's not going to refoliate from the canopy. It may still have life in the roots. Underneath those dense canopies, you have a lot of litter and not a lot of light. Probably, at least in some cases, a fair amount of salt in that mix as well. It's not a very good place for colonization by other plants. But with defoliation, then you at least get the opening of the canopy. And so then there's the opportunity for other plants to come in and colonize. So we've been talking about this as we were conducting the beetle monitoring and watching the defoliation over time. And in 2009, Wright and Jim Spencer from the NRCS went out and visited about 17 of the beetle monitoring sites that Wright had been working, and just did a plant list. I work with amphibians too, and we talk about visual encounter surveys, and so that's sort of the terminology that I think of. Wandering around, looking and recording what plants you see. In this case, sort of peeking under the canopy. We're trying to disturb that understory as little as possible so that it really is, the results are really reflecting what's going on with just beetle disturbance. In 2010, 10 of those sites were dropped, partly because we refined our site selection criteria. Some of them had been cut or burned by somebody else, and there were other reasons for dropping them. We added 3 new sites and continued with just the visual encounter surveys. In 2011, we added a point intercept transect to each of those 10 sites. And in 2012, we added 2 more sites, and this last year we added 3 additional sites. So we have sites in Grand County. I don't know if we can, let's see. So a cluster of them on the Green River. These 3 are on the river shorelines. This dot represents 2 that are on a wash that it's not very far from the river, but it's in a tributary of the Green. And then we have some along the Colorado River, Williams Bottom that Wright showed you a number of photos on, Dead Horse Point, Access Road, and there's a wash there. 2 up near the Book Cliffs. This one looks like it's on the river, but it's actually up inside the Site Canyon. And then these 3 we added this year, and these 2 Green River tributaries were added in 2012. So the point intercept transects were 30.5 meters long, intercepts every 1.5 meters. And you estimate cover, as Anna explained earlier, the number of hits along the transect divided by the total number of points. In our case, we had 21 points. So in some of the sites, we had quite a bit of change. You can see in 2012 at this place, very little growing in here. 2012 or 2013, pretty much 100% cover of, in this case, I think this one was goosefoot Chenopodium fremontii. We had a large number of species that we saw at sites. Some sites had no species growing underneath. Others had up to, I think the most we had at any one site in 1 year was 17. So this, as the title says, is preliminary, and I'm just giving you the broad brush, which is the whole data set. So it's a combination of all of the sites and the species there. At least I'm not the only one that's been doing this all day. So the Colorado River shoreline sites, this is the one that we added in 2013. You can see that at 3 of these, the most number of species encountered was 2013. 1 was 2011. The 2 sites where we have data for more than this past year, 2013, was also the year that we had the most species. But if you look at the total species list, we had 51 species in 2011, only 47 in 2013. 2011 was the wet year and the high peak flows for certainly the last 10 years or so. So it's kind of interesting that on the Colorado we had more species a couple years after that. 2013 was relatively dry. It wasn't really dry, but it was certainly not a wet year. On the Green River, the 2 sites that had much in the way of plants at all did peak in 2011, and they had very large increases in the numbers of species. And Allie, would you bring my water up here, please? Thanks. And then the 2 sites that we added in 2012, 2013 had more species. Thank you. So we're seeing some differences between the rivers in how these communities are behaving. And I hope over the next year or so, especially with another year of data, that we can start to figure out exactly what's going on with these things. So I'm supposed to talk about something else related to those species, but I can't remember what it was. But that's what the beetles are here for. You can just enjoy them. The number of species that we saw in 2011 in response to the flooding, I think we had the inundation in the spring, and then a number of species germinated in the summer after that. Our data collecting period is late September into October. And so those plants had a chance to germinate and grow. 2012 was an extremely dry year. As far as the river flow went, not only was it the lowest in about the last 12 or 13 years, but it was also about 6 weeks earlier. It peaked in early April. And so the response of these plant communities to a very wet year and then a very dry year right after that was to shed a lot of species. And you see a lot of turnover between those 2 years, including perennials. We had 24 perennials in 2011. In 2012, 12 of those were missing. And a few were added, so it wasn't just a loss. But for 24 perennial plants to drop out of the observations, I think is pretty significant and indicates how stressful that 2012 year was. I ran similarities. Again, this is with the whole species list for all of the sites. And one of the interesting things is how different the 2009 community was from most of the other years. 2009, 2010 were pretty similar. And then with the high water influx in 2011, it changed the character of the community, and 2009 was quite different from those other years. And I think that's also reflected over here with the greater similarity between 2011, 12, and 13, that flood year turned a switch or something and pushed those communities into a different direction. At individual sites, from year to year, the similarity values were wildly variable. In some sites, like this one along the Green River, the similarity index ranged from 0 to 1, which is the full range of the possible index. And there were species present every year, so it wasn't like in one year there weren't any species, and so of course you get 0 because you're multiplying by 0. But on average, at this particular site, there were only about one species shared from year to year. So the dynamics of those communities is really wild and makes it difficult to see a pattern. And again, Wright was talking about the mortality data that we've been collecting and how difficult it's been to try to get patterns teased out of that. And I think the individual variation from site to site is pretty tremendous. We had some species that in the first few years we sort of considered as the standards. These were always going to be there, and then they would suddenly drop out. Not necessarily in response to that wet year, but they would be at a large number of sites for a couple of years, and then they would just disappear and they haven't come back. And so there's a lot of dynamic going on there that we still need to look at. We separated them into annual, biennial, and perennial life histories. And you can see that if it'll stay where I want it, not where I tell it. The Colorado River shoreline sites showed a pretty consistent increase in perennials over time. The tributary sites also showed that to some extent. I think this little increase in the annuals comes from adding those two sites at the end. The last year they were dominated by annuals. And so we'll watch that over time. Green River sites didn't do much. I think this 2011 increase in annuals is probably in response to the flooding that year. And the tributaries, mostly annuals, very few species in those two sites. They're heavily covered by mostly dead tamarisk, but there's a thick litter layer, and it's still pretty dark and not very conducive for plant establishment in there yet. We also looked at annual or native versus exotic components, and you can see more exotics for the most part. The tributaries on the Colorado have more natives, and they're also more diverse in general. And I think it's because we were seeing more of the upland species along the edges of those washes moving in under the tamarisk canopy. Some of the, well, one of the tributaries in particular, just as far as tamarisk went, it just kind of fell apart over the course of one winter. So we went back and big trees were falling over. The canopy had really opened up there, and so we were seeing some big differences at that particular site. And I think that is what fosters more of the natives coming in. So the point intercept transect, I realize is pretty skimpy for these places, especially looking at the variability that we're getting there. And we'd like to do more transects, longer transects, but these are the things that we started with. And so at least we had some data, if we can ever get my thumb in the right place. So this is the total live cover. This is the non-living cover, litter, wood, and bare soil. And I've lumped these together into the main stem on the green, the shoreline, and shoreline on the Colorado. In 2011, we didn't have any Green River tributaries, and so we only have these three. And so you can look at what the three kinds of sites we're doing in a single year. Pretty low cover, but the Colorado shoreline sites were a little bit higher. This is a reflection primarily of a couple of sites that had really diverse and pretty heavily covered understory, even though the canopy was still had been full tamarisk and still had a fair amount of the structure of the trees there. In 2012, we added these tributary sites, and you can see again very little vegetation in those sites. The Colorado main stem is increasing in vegetation and dropped a little bit in 2012 or in 2013, but basically those are showing at least a little bit of increase in plant cover under the canopies. If we break out the wood, soil, and litter, mostly what happens is that the amount of litter increases over time, and the chance of hitting a piece of wood or finding actual bare ground under these things is pretty slim. And again, the variability between sites is pretty high. This is that Williams Bottom site that Wright was talking about earlier. You can see it's not heavily canopied with tamarisk, but there's still a fair amount of green tamarisk there. And this is one of the release sites in 2004. So it's had a long history with beetles, but it still has a lot of tamarisk alive there. The other site is one of the Green River tributary sites, and you can see it was very heavily covered with tamarisk, but there's not a lot of green left, and there's not much coming in underneath yet. And so we had within the suite of sites that we have a large amount of variability, and we need to look more at, I think, defoliation history. When did the beetles get there first, and how long have they been there? Some of those things, like the Williams Bottom site, I think will defy that trend. But I think in general, those that have been hit by the beetles more frequently, they've been defoliated longer. That system has been open longer, and we should find more vegetation underneath. This is just looking at the cover broken out among the four kinds again for those for the litter, the plants and the litter, Green River and Colorado River. And then I just wanted to throw this, since I have a couple minutes. Here's the 2011 peak. The Colorado River 2012 peak, if you can call it that. The Green River peak was low, but it wasn't
outside the realm of the natural time frame, at least. And so that may have been part of why the communities along the Green responded more directly to those to that flow than the Colorado River did. And I think I'll stop there.